City of Binghamton Planning Commission. First item on the agenda is roll call. Jack Chineka.
Brother.
Arthur Osvelt is absent currently. Mario DeFulvio. Paul O'Brien.
Here.
Joseph D'Angelo.
Here.
And Mara Cahill.
Here.
All right. Straight into business then. Discussion and recommendation to City Council regarding proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance. And for the record, we're being audio and video recorded for today's meeting.
Did we start the record?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Tito, what do we do?
So we handed out the packets with the executive summary and the full amendment digitally, and some people got paper copies. So what we've done before, or what we did when we presented to council, was we just went through the executive summary, and if anything stood out, then you guys could ask a question, and we could get into more details on that particular item, if that works.
Sounds great.
So we broke it down in the executive summary by article. The first article was just sort of introductory language, so we didn't make any changes there. Article 2 is definitions. The main changes we made there was we just updated the definitions to match the changes that were made elsewhere in the code. And we simplified that section a little bit. Redundancies were combined into broader categories just to make it easier to navigate that section of the code.
I noticed that you did a lot of work on the functional and factual family equivalent.
Yeah.
It kind of, it looks like it made it a little simpler in wording.
Right.
Was that any reason for that? Were you having trouble with the previous, the way it was before?
I'm trying to pull it up now. The way it is currently is sort of difficult to enforce.
Okay.
Let me get to that. Yeah, we just simplified it, and that summarizes all of the criteria that exist now are sort of summarized in that one line. So rather than having a bulleted list, we just made it one sentence.
Okay. And there's no loophole between functional family and group living that you guys see? Just wondering.
So group living that's going to be any residential unit with more than 7 beds in it. So 8 to 10 bedrooms would be group living. Group living sort of nullifies the functional family issue because it's only allowed in non-residential districts.
Okay.
So in a non-residential district, you do not have to be a family or functional family to live, for example, on Main Street.
Okay. All right.
So Article 4, General Regulations. It's pretty self-explanatory what's in that section. It's general regulations, but there are also standards regarding certain land uses. And the majority of the changes we made here were to the accessory uses section, which was, we were just correcting issues that we found that the zoning officer was having difficulty enforcing. There's some contradictions there. So we made the regulations for accessory buildings and uses more clear and concise. We consolidated all accessory use regulations into this one section, whereas before they were scattered in different sections of the code. Now, any regulation pertaining to an accessory use can be found in this one section. We created clear standards for home occupations, and we allowed them in the R1s and the R2s. And so in doing that, we thought that we needed to increase the regulation to protect the R1 and R2, and this is where you would find those regulations. And we clarified fencing regulations, which we were having trouble with enforcement there.
On the zoning map for the city, these different districts, R1, R2, is there a current map always on the zoning section of the city groups?
On the city website,
Yeah,
there should be.
Yes.
but then I'll look at that, then I want to print that, because that would be good to have for every meeting we have
Okay.
for there, and just, if there's one I can print it off, just trying to go back and forth to this, put in my mind where things were.
Right.
Especially when we get into discussions about multi-use housing, like
Sure.
student housing and things.
Yeah, we could print an 11 by 17 copy that you could sort of
That'd be
fold and
great.
put in a binder or something.
Great.
Articles 6 and 7.
Wait, Tito, before
I'm
you
sorry,
go.
yep.
So, a home occupation as an accessory use, what does somebody have to do if they have something that's not in the list and wants to use their house as something that's not approved in the regulations?
If it's not something that could be considered a home occupation, then they would have to, and they were in a residential district, they would have to get a use variance to allow that use.
Okay. And would we see that, or would that just be a variance?
That would just be the zoning board, unless there are certain things that trigger planning commission review. They're doing some kind of construction or something along those lines.
Okay. For the record, Art is here now.
One vote out.
I was locked out, I'm sorry, I had to figure out how to get in.
Climbed out the other window.
I don't do that anymore.
So Articles 6 and 7 are the sections of the code where the allowable land uses are listed. So some key changes here. Again, we created clear standards for home occupations because the comprehensive plan called for allowing home occupations in the R1s and R2s where they're not currently allowed. So we did that, but at the same time, we thought we should add regulations to make sure that if somebody does have a home occupation in the R1, they're not making changes to their property that make that property out of character with the residential neighborhood.
Is there a list of recommended R1 home businesses? Because,
Yes, there is.
Yeah, there's a list of,
in all this stuff that I read, it's there.
yeah, in the main amendment. And we can go there now if you want.
Now let's do that. What page is that on?
There are no page numbers.
Sure there are.
Sure there are. Not me, my copy.
Well, so you didn't copy yours, did you? You had them print it for you?
Yeah.
That's where you screwed up. If you had printed it yourself, you'd have gotten all the pages, 48 of 126.
I didn't screw up. Whoever printed it screwed up.
I actually don't have page numbers on my PDF. So. It's around page 40.
Or at least you're around
I'll tell you what,
yeah.
if you guys were hoping I wasn't gonna be here.
Check page 40.
Page 40, okay, let's do page 46.
Under H, is that?
Yeah, it's page 40.
Should be green, a lot of green.
Get a lot of red crossed out.
Well, I can read the list
Why don't
out.
you read the list?
Yeah,
To
so,
refresh my memory, that's all.
I found it.
so the term home occupation shall include but is not limited to the following. Beauty salon or barber shop with a maximum of 2 chairs. Business shall be conducted by appointment only. Daycare with a maximum of 5 children/clients and no overnight care. Such facilities must be licensed by the appropriate state agency. office of an accountant, architect, computer programmer, counselor, engineer, lawyer, real estate agent, or insurance agent. Business shall be conducted by appointment only. Office of a salesperson, provided that no retail or wholesale transactions are made on the premises. Teacher, instructor, such as dance or music or crafts, with a maximum ratio of 1 teacher to 5 students. Workshop or studio for an artist, sculptor, photographer, craftsperson, writer, composer, musician, seamstress, dressmaker, or tailor. Homebound employment of a person with a physical or developmental disability who is unable to work away from home by reason of disability. Yeah, so those are the examples of uses, and then following that are the regulations.
Right.
So, yeah, so the regulations, to summarize, administrative planning review would be required. No more than a quarter of the floor area of the house can be devoted to the home business. It has to be carried on wholly within the building or accessory building. No internal or external alteration of the building that changes its character as a dwelling. Hours of operation are 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Delivery 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. No more than 1 employee that doesn't live in the house can work there. No retail sales or display for retail sales. No outdoor storage of commercial vehicles or equipment. There's a weight limit for delivery trucks.
They still have to come in front of the planning commission when they open this business, or is this gonna be something they can do without having to come in front of the city for anything?
This would require administrative planning review.
So they'd at least have to come to you guys?
Right, to confirm that all these regulations are being met
Correct.
and to sort of have
So
a
you just
record.
can't, I mean, because somebody will pick this up and go, I can do this.
No, the first regulation says it needs planning review.
Okay. Now, my next question, and I'm probably gonna be on every single one of them. How's the city gonna monitor this after the fact? Because I'll be honest with you, the city has done a poor job of monitoring any of this stuff that we've done since I've been here, and I can see over the years of what's been passed, and I mean, I still look at a burned up house that supposedly code is on to, to repair and fix. This house caught on fire when my daughter was a sophomore in high school, and she's now 24 years old, and it still looks the same. So these regulations are all great, but if somebody isn't going to enforce them,
Right.
they're useless.
So when somebody applies for a home occupation, they'll get a decision letter. The decision letter will lay out what the regulations are. And then it would be up to the zoning officer to enforce that if we got a complaint about the business. And
So we're still only going to be reactive. We're not going to be proactive then. Because that's what we are right now. We're reactive. We're not proactive.
unfortunately, we only have one zoning officer, and his responsibilities are pretty broad. With home occupations in particular, I think that they'll be well policed by neighbors because these are going to be in residential areas. And so if there's an issue with the home business, we'll probably hear about it pretty quickly.
Do you have in here like a catering? Certainly I know people that do that out of their home and have done it forever.
Right. I believe that would be allowed.
So what this is doing is a lot of the businesses, like you said, are already functioning. This is just listing them, so we have a legal way to go about it. Like now that it's stated in here, they can't sit there and go, well, I didn't know, or there's no regulations. It's like things that are already happening in the districts, like with the R3, we have a lot of student housing. What we're trying to do is make sure that the student housing is not allowed to keep, separating our houses from them. Or we have caterers who are running a business, but there's no accountability to management. So this gives better accountability. And right now, there's no safeguard for anything that people are doing.
We could add that.
So is it
Bakery,
allowable
catering.
use in an R1?
It's not listed as explicitly, but it would be allowed as long as it met the regulations of delivery times and things like that. We can certainly put that in as an example.
Yeah, I think that would make sense.
I think you want to put it in there because it's not, you don't have anything there.
Yeah.
And somebody's going to do that.
It's not a
Have a note for this.
Right.
Yeah, I can write a note for that.
It's page 36 and 35, so everybody knows. That has numbers on their page.
Hey, Tito, I want to talk about, is there anything like for artists, like, painters,
Yeah, that's one of the examples.
Yeah, that was mentioned, but-
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So we're allowing institutional uses in the R3 district with planning commission review, community centers and things like that, that are not currently allowed, would now be allowed with a special use permit from the planning commission. There are certain uses that we've made permitted by right, so that if they're under a certain size, they can get administrative planning approval, because these are uses that have been deemed desirable.
Give me an example.
Light industrial use, we wanted to sort of streamline the approval for that, as long as it's under 4,000 square feet, just because that is something that, through discussions, was considered desirable. It employs people, generates jobs and revenue, and if it's light industrial, it's not going to have the adverse impacts of a heavy industrial facility. Microbrewery is another example.
Is that what would you classify them, that they would go into light industrial because of their manufacturing a product? Is that how that's looked at?
Microbrewery?
Yeah.
Microbrewery is called out separately, but technically, yeah, you could probably call it light industrial.
So those that are making it in their garage for fun?
I don't know if that would be an allowed home occupation.
Yeah, but if they're making it, I mean, it's like the old days when they made wine and everything. If you weren't selling it, you were.
Oh, yeah, I mean, you can do that. I wouldn't want to interfere with that.
Oh, they are selling it? Okay.
Bootlegging.
Geez, you know more than I do, Jack.
I've been around. Not buying them, obviously.
Right.
but-
Right.
Preserving the integrity of downtown by limiting certain uses and encouraging new ones. So I just gave an example of some that we've encouraged.
We're back up here in the front now?
Yeah, this is in the executive summary.
Okay.
So I gave an example of ones that we're encouraging, ones that we would be eliminating downtown, for example, would be pawn shops. We've eliminated pyramidal zoning, which was something that was called for in the comp plan. It's kind of a boring sort of concept, but pyramidal zoning is when you allow everything from a less intense district in a more intense district. So for example, you would allow everything that's allowed in the R3, you would allow it in the C1 service commercial district. And that doesn't always work well, so we just made it so that each district has its own allowed uses and they don't necessarily carry over. We added more allowable uses in the Charles Street Business Park to make it easier to develop. Just greater possibilities for...
Well, what is it now then?
Charles Street Business Park has its own zoning district designation, but there's a limited number of uses in there, and so we just added more uses just to make it more developable.
No.
Allowing light industrial and research and development in the C1 and C2 is another. And Joe, you had asked for backup from the comprehensive plan, and if you look at in the parentheses there, where it says land use 1.4, 4.3, and so on, those are chapters, and the chapter and the recommendation from the comp plan that corresponds to that change. Article 8 is site plan review updates. It was formerly called Series A site plan requirements. We're just naming it Planning Commission review and approval requirements because we're getting rid of the Series A language. Doesn't really make sense, and it just confuses people. And the site plan review process has been streamlined, so clearly defining the type and level of review required for all actions. And we add language to clearly define when planning staff can send applications to the planning commission. So if we get an application for administrative review and we identify issues, or the building department or the fire marshal identifies issues, then we can send it to planning commission for a more thorough review. And that's the case now, but we just sort of clarified that language. Article 9 is the section that talks about what type of review applies to what type of action. And this is where we really streamline the planning approval process. So we simplified the categories of review. Right now, we have Series A site plan review, Series A site plan review exception, and exception. So we're just proposing planning commission review, administrative planning review, and that's it. Those are the two types of review. Either it gets reviewed by the planning commission, or it gets reviewed by staff, or it doesn't require any review at all.
On that note, Nick, earlier you asked about use variances getting reviewed from the planning commission. We did actually add that in there. So anything that gets a use variance also has to come to you.
Okay.
So the rule now is that planning commission review and approval is required for all new construction, anything that requires a special use permit, and any change of use that's over 4,000 square feet. Administrative planning review will be required for all uses that are permitted by right, that do not involve new construction, and are less than 4,000 square feet. And any new business that does not involve a change of use does not require planning review anymore, and that we made that clear, black and white in the law. So if you're going from an Italian restaurant to a Chinese restaurant and you're not changing anything but the sign, you don't need to submit any application, as long as the original use was legal in the first place. Right now, the code is sort of, it contradicts itself, and it says that does require planning review by the planning commission, and then there are other parts in that same section that say it's exempt, and it's not really clear which applies, but we just want to clarify it that if there's no change of use, you don't need planning review.
Do you think this will reduce or increase the number of projects that come before the actual planning board?
Probably reduce, and so it would, what the planning commission would be seeing would be larger projects. All new construction would still come to the planning commission, but things that aren't involving new construction, you would see mostly larger projects.
So they could be administratively approved in the planning group.
Right, if they're under 4,000 square feet and there's no new construction. We expanded the planning commission's authority to modify bulk requirements. So the planning commission, if there's a project for new construction and it's 5 feet too close to the property line, it could be the case that we actually get that modified by the planning commission rather than having to go to the ZBA if the change is minor enough. Planning commission already has that authority, but it's sort of insignificant in the amount that you can change things, so we just made it so you have a little more power to change setback requirements, parking requirements, height requirements, and things like that. Planning staff has the ability to do that now, and we got rid of that power for planning staff because we just didn't think it was appropriate. So we eliminated that.
Just going back quick to that 4,000, that's roughly 60 feet by 60 feet. I'm thinking of some of the things that have come up, like on Gray Street, that one corner restaurant, I didn't see any activity on that. I don't think they ever did anything more.
Giuseppe's game.
Yeah, is that like, it's probably within 60 by 60.
That involved new construction. They were proposing to build a second story on that.
So
But if
would that
they
come-
weren't gonna do that, actually, no, that would still have had to come because that was a use variance as well.
Okay.
Yeah, with the addition that they were putting on there, that would have had to come to the planning commission.
And some of like the one-story conversions for religious use that are in like houses that have come through, they would,
I think the places of worship require a special use permit, so that would have to go to the planning commission. Article 10 is the parking section. So our existing parking regulations right now are outdated and they require a very large number of surface parking for new development, which is not ideal in a flood-prone city. It's not ideal financially for developers either. And then also the way it's written is sort of complicated and it's hard to really even understand how many parking spaces you need if you're trying to open a business. So generally we reduce parking requirements for commercial uses just to make it easier to develop existing buildings or to make it cheaper to develop a new business. But we did the opposite for residential, especially high-density residential units. So residential parking requirements are now based on the number of bedrooms rather than the number of units. So you've seen a lot of examples of 12, 13, 14 bedroom houses that only need 2 parking spaces because it's only 1 unit. So now we're making the number of parking spaces required based on beds.
And regardless whether it's new or they're converting an existing building.
Right.
Because that's the rub for me all along, from day one, was the fact that somebody's gonna take a building downtown, they're gonna put 24 beds in it, and oh, by the way, Art, parking's not an issue there. What do you mean it's not an issue?
Right.
It's like that on the west side.
I mean, so you're telling, so now those conversions
Yep.
are under this requirement.
Yes, so parking requirements will no longer be waived for residential units with 5 or more bedrooms in the downtown business district.
Have you done anything with how many feet away from the building it has to be?
Yeah, so all residential uses, regardless of district now, have to be within 250 feet, except in the R1 and R2, they have to be on site, the parking spaces.
So it was 800 prior to this?
In a commercial
Yes,
district,
so
yeah.
now it's 250.
Now it's 250. And in addition to that, if you have 5 or more bedrooms in any unit, it has to be on site. It can't even be within 250, it has to be on site. Parking requirements are standardized now based on gross floor area, which makes it much easier to calculate. In some cases, it was just too complicated, like restaurants were based on the number. You need a space for every 3 available seats, plus a space for every 2 employees at the peak shift. And it was just things that are hard to figure out in the first place, that a restaurant owner can make up numbers for that, and it would be hard to enforce. So we just made it based on gross floor area. If you're of a certain size, you need a certain number of spaces. We updated the dimensions of the parking spaces because those were actually not compliant with industry standards. We updated the number of spaces required for uses to reflect recommendations by the Institute of Traffic Engineers and the Urban Land Institute, because our current parking requirements are based on sort of pre-1990 standards for suburban parking requirements, and they don't really fit well in Binghamton. Parking requirements are standardized for similar uses, so all manufacturing, for example, has 1 parking requirement. All eating and drinking establishments have 1 parking requirement, whereas before it was very specific And again, it made it harder to figure out how many spaces you needed for your project. Parking requirements for existing non-residential buildings start at 4,000 square feet. Right now, they start at 2,500. So right now, anything under 2,500 square feet, if it's an existing storefront, does not need to go out and build or pay for parking to open a business. We're increasing that number to 4,000 square feet just to encourage development in some of our existing commercial corridors. Just makes it more affordable and more practical to open a business if you don't need to go out and build a 10-space parking lot, for example. Landscaping requirements have been modified to make them easier to apply. They're very complicated right now, and they really only can be applied by a landscape architect. So we just made it easier to figure out what you need to do as far as landscaping. I don't mean to put landscape architects out of business, but
Right there.
yeah, we just want to make it a little easier.
And is there something in there, like the Jack Sherman effect, of not trying to put trees on where the cars are being parked?
Parking lots still require trees, and car lots are
It makes no sense.
Car lots are regulated as parking lots. In the case of Jag Sherman, they were able to get a variance for
Well,
that.
there's other dealers in the community, and certainly they don't want trees. They don't want droppings on their cars.
So they can go out and get a variance from the zoning board. We just think it makes more sense for the baseline rule to be what's better for the city than what's better for car dealers. If the car dealers want to get the variance, they will most likely get it.
Just a question, Nick, I noticed that the requirement is for 12 inches of topsoil. Is that standard? Would it add to drainage or reduce it? The layer?
I mean, you'd have more infiltration.
It would drain better with topsoil than 6 and then gravel, or?
Yeah, if you're planting, you wouldn't want gravel, really.
Okay.
And ultimately, most likely, underneath that 12 inches is a severely compacted
Marzipan clay.
sub-base. It's not great, but, Tito, I was wondering, so I used to work in Baltimore, and they had a really comprehensive landscape manual, and what it did was, it had different requirements generated number of plantings, and then it was up to the designer to spread those out any way they wanted. So like, for instance, sometimes we would do plans, just like you're talking about, like for a car dealership, and we wouldn't want to put the trees, where the way that it's laid out here, where they would be required to be placed. And it would put more leeway to the project designer. Any thought on something a little bit more like that?
So less sort of prescriptive.
Yeah, I mean, the things that I remember most are, depending on the number of linear feet of property line you had between certain districts, it generated like, for every linear feet, you had to plant one shrub and
Right.
one tree or something.
Right.
Obviously not that, those numbers are not accurate, but
Right.
any thought on doing something?
Did we get rid of the spacing requirement for perimeter trees?
We modified it a little bit, so so you're kind of saying on the same site, you could just like rather than putting a tree island in, you would plant a tree like in a lawn elsewhere?
Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of so that, like, if Joe designed it, you'd see one plan, and if Tito designed it, you could see a completely different plan. They both
Okay.
meet the requirements, but they were just, it made a lot of people happy with the leeway it
Gotcha.
gave
Okay.
the designers.
Yeah.
We could probably make it more flexible.
We could look into that. You said Baltimore?
Yes,
Okay.
and it's still, I think the Baltimore County planting manual, I think it's still available. I can send you the old one from 12 years ago.
Yeah.
Still use it
Okay.
sometimes, but.
Tom Costello's son is a councilman in Baltimore City, so might be able to get your hands on that.
Or just Google it?
What's the general, rollout now? If this is approved, if the recommendation comes from this group, then it goes to full council?
It goes back to council, this is my understanding, I just talked to Ken earlier today about it. It'll go back to council's planning committee and then to the full body. And then they could sign it out potentially at that point to a business meeting, and then at a business meeting they would vote.
So if there were proposals that come before the planning board in the interim, would that, what might be the time, a couple of months?
Hopefully, less than 2 months.
So if anything came up in between that under the old rule might have been looked at one way, under the new rule, a different way.
Well, the planning commission right now has the authority to look at a project and request whatever changes the commission sees fit to protect the community or the environment or whatever the case may be. So if you agree with these things in theory, you could apply them right now to site plans.
It's like, it would help out with something like the Decker building, which we had that big meeting on. Like, right now, if we were to put this in, you can't have, what was it, more than 7 units in R3 residential, which, that was 37 beds, that was like so many more. They wouldn't be able to do that. They could only do that downtown. So, I mean, that would alleviate a lot of the extra, like, challenges that we have with that. And it'd also keep our communities and residential areas, the integrity of the neighborhood where it should be.
So if they said at that last meeting they were thinking of coming back with a mixed use option this next time, that you want to study this to see how this would, how their plan or any other group's plan would look under this versus the old one.
I think you could. It'd probably be good to ask court counsel like how much weight this would hold.
City council signed this, and we went through all of this as well. So, I think we'd all be in agreement with that if you were, so.
I should mention too that I don't think actually we spelled it out in the executive summary, but we made a change where 1 to 4 bedroom units are sort of the standard. 5 to 7 bedroom units have much more regulations that apply to them in terms of parking, lot size.
Yeah, that verbiage is in here somewhere. I read that.
In the executive summary?
No.
Okay.
In the
okay.
In the 120 page.
Yeah.
I just can't tell you which page that's on, but I did read that.
Yeah, so 5 to 7 bedrooms is regulated pretty heavily because, in our experience, those are large groups of individuals and that can have negative impacts in the neighborhood. 8 to 10 is considered a new use, which we're calling group living, and so fraternities are in that, rooming houses are in that, and so on. That's not allowed anymore in residential districts at all. It's only allowed in non-residential districts. And plus it has those additional regulations that 5 to 7 bedrooms have. And then beyond 10 bedrooms in one unit would no longer be allowed in the city.
You brought it up, so I gotta ask. Fraternities. There's a fraternity on Main Street down by the library. There's a fraternity there, and there's one above, like near the brewery above. I see the Greek letters across the top of the. Have those been? Are they authorized? Do they come in front of? Are they supposed to come in front of us for variance, or do they come in front of you guys for variance?
A fraternity house needs a special use permit from the planning commission.
Are those two? Did they get a special use permit?
Not since I've been here.
Yeah, I noticed that a couple weeks ago too.
See, this is all the thing. This is all great. But here I go. I'm going to tell you again. I'm just the guy that's on a commission. It's not my job, and I'm going. Holy mackerel! I wonder if they got a variance. I wonder if they got a variance. Who's doing that? I mean, but there's 2 of them right there. At least you noticed them. Somebody did. But I noticed them the other day. Because again, that question was, with what the projects were in front of us this last meeting, we again reiterated the fact that they would have to come back in front of us if they had large groups of fraternities, sororities, or whatever other groups. I'm thinking, wait, I see these, the ones right, I mean, the mayors could go like this and
Right.
see what's going on.
So why should anybody follow this when nobody else does?
So right now, the way that fraternities and sororities are defined right now, it's for sanctioned fraternal organizations that are affiliated with the university. That's the type of thing that's hard to enforce. By putting it under group living, you have 8 to 10 bedrooms, it's group living, it's not allowed in the residential district, it's sort of simpler and easier to enforce. When somebody has a group of people in an apartment downtown that are in the same fraternity, the landlord can say, this is not a fraternity house, I don't need a special use permit. My tenants just happen to be in the same group, and the next group is going to be, either not affiliated with any group at all or in a different group. So it's kind of...
So they can advertise, they can say they're not a fraternity, but they can advertise their fraternity on the front of the building.
They cannot do that.
Yeah.
They can't do that.
Sometimes
Especially in
the
historic
students are
downtown.
not even like part of any organization that's legally through Binghamton University. I'm on the Binghamton University Housing Board with that, and we're discussing these issues.
Again, just, you said fraternities, and if I don't tell you now before we get to fraternities, I forget.
So lumping, yeah, so the answer...
You might want to check on those two. okay?
Yeah.
That's
Well-
all.
We'll,
Yeah.
we'll take...
Yeah, I
they're
already brought
supposed to
them
have
up,
that sign up.
actually, so.
Yeah, just give me an email, we'll check them.
And it's something the general civilian is not, you're not going to be able to explain it.
Mhm.
This is not, because I don't think you're particularly satisfied. Am I right?
Well, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Right.
Okay?
Right. No, I got you.
I mean, and all I'm saying is, again, we're being reactive instead of proactive. And that's what's got to change. City's got to be reactive, or proactive, I mean, proactive, because they already are. Sorry, I didn't mean to slow it
No,
down.
that's okay. So the last thing in parking is bicycle parking requirements, and we sort of made those make a little more sense because the way they were wasn't scaling right, so that larger parking lots would have to have sort of a very large number of bicycle spaces that were not likely to really be necessary. So we just changed the formula of how they apply, but they still apply. And then the design standards we took from the Association of Pedestrian and Bicycle Professionals, whereas right now they were just kind of random, the requirements for bike racks. Article 11 is sign regulations. And this is actually the last article. So Article 11 is sign that we amended. Sign regulations, we didn't make many changes to this because the sign ordinance was recently updated. What we did change was the regulations in regards to static LED displays, because we kept getting variances for these and they kept getting approved. So it was clear that it was something that maybe we should be more flexible with.
I have a question. Going through any of this, we're looking at it, and you're saying we're trying to make this more business friendly. Where's the business people? Like, have you talked to Park Outdoor and say, is this something that I can work with? Where's the business people, or even the developers? Are those things going to work for them?
So the changes we've made are based on the comprehensive plan, and there was a lot of outreach to business owners during that process. There was a lot of community input during that process. There were focus groups and stakeholder groups with business owners at that time, and they had input at that point. And now we're just sort of executing what was called for in the comp plan. And then there's also our own experience in the planning department in taking in these applications. And there's sometimes, the way the regulations are written, we have to enforce certain things when people apply for a new business that we don't really believe are that helpful. So there's some regulations that are overburdensome that as planners we don't necessarily think give a real benefit to the community, and then they're a burden to the business owner. And we've dealt, every application is that gets submitted is submitted by a developer or business owner, so we talk to them, and it's just based on our experience, things that we've seen are hurdles that aren't necessarily good for the city that we're trying to eliminate. I don't know if I answered your question.
Not the way I want it.
Okay.
I
Well,
think you need more current business input.
this is still, I mean, this is public, it's going to go to city council, there'll be a public hearing for it. We're gonna notice for that public hearing.
Will this be on the website so somebody could read it?
We can put it, yeah, we can put it up on the website.
I think probably it should somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I'll ask Ken
Yeah.
what.
Because the other thing you could do, if it was up on the website, then we could tell people to go look there.
Right.
Different business
Yeah.
of thing, and just say, hey, look at what the changes we've made, and
That's a
again,
good idea.
being proactive, we can put it out there and let them review it, so that we're not
Yeah.
being reactive 6 months from now or a year when they go, change this, and we didn't know about it.
Okay, well, try to do that. I'll just ask court counsel what they think of that.
Sounds great.
And then the last changes throughout the code, we just changed the language so that things that are being done by the zoning officer right now are reflected in the code. There's a lot of things in the code that say that they're under the jurisdiction of the supervisor of building and construction, but in reality, the zoning officer does them, so we just put that in the code.